However, her evil act reached the ears of the gods, and they were not happy with Amaka. In anger and fury, they cursed her. They whispered to the wind, "May the very wealth you seek become the curse which torments you." Not knowing about the curse, Amaka continued to steal from other villagers. She stole not only to eat, but also to sell at the market. But the gods of Nri village had placed a curse on her. Once upon a time, in a village called Nri, where the earth was newly formed and the gods were still watching over the people, lived a woman named Amaka. Amaka owned a small farm where she grew a few crops and animals, but she wasn't satisfied. She was very greedy and looked at other people's farms with envious eyes. Not only was Amaka greedy, but she was also very lazy. People in the village avoided her because of her greedy and lazy nature. "Why won't she work? Why can't she be like her friend Ada?" they said. Amaka had a very good friend named Ada. Ada also owned a large farm next to Amaka's, but unlike Amaka, Ada was very hardworking and grateful. Her best friend Ada would advise her, "Amaka, stop looking at other people's wealth. Instead, work hard on your farm so that you have big crops to sell in the market when the harvest approaches." But Amaka didn't listen. She only frowned and said, "I have my ways, Ada. Let me be." Every night, in her greed for more crops, Amaka would go around all the farms in Nri village, stealing all their crops. She plucked everything and left before anyone could see her, so no one knew who stole their crops. She always went at dawn and returned before dusk, pretending as if she didn't know anything. The villagers wondered, "What is happening to our crops? Who is stealing them?" But Amaka kept her mouth shut, refusing to say a thing. She was both lazy and greedy, not knowing her actions would bring consequences. And so Amaka continued to live in Nri village, wandering lazily in the day and stealing the crops at night. She wasn't satisfied with the few crops she gathered from her farm. She wanted more, so she stole from other people's farms. The villagers continued to wonder who came to their farms and stole all their crops, not knowing it was Amaka. But high above the sky, the gods weren't happy with what Amaka was doing. They waited for her to change her ways, but if she couldn't, they would place a curse on her. A curse Amaka wouldn't be able to control. Despite the trouble, Amaka continued to steal the villagers' crops. She didn't focus on the little the gods had given her but stole from others. She didn't know that her actions and greedy nature would soon attract a heavy curse from the gods. One day, as Amaka wandered around lazily in Nri village, looking for the next farm to steal from, she didn't find any. All she found were dried leaves and empty husks. This was because Amaka had stolen crops from all the farms, and there was nothing left except the crops on Ada's farm, which she hadn't yet stolen from. She turned to Ada's farm and smiled mischievously. Ada's farm was full of green leaves and big crops which no one had plucked. Then, as the wind blew, the spirit of greed entered Amaka's heart, and her eyes shone with greed. She thought, "My little farm isn't enough for me. I can only get more if I take from others." And so, Amaka decided to steal from Ada's farm. She struck by night, and by morning, everything was gone. The next morning, when Ada came to work, she looked at her farm and was shocked at what she saw. The crops on her farm were gone, and there was nothing left except the empty husks and broken stems. She shouted, "Who stole my crops?" But no one replied. She asked Amaka, "Do you know what happened to my farm?" But Amaka denied knowing anything about it. The villagers looked at Ada's farm with pity, wondering who might have stolen her crops. But the truth was that it was her own friend, Amaka. She had stolen all of Ada's crops by night, and by morning, everything was gone. She planned to sell them during the harvest season so she could make more money. However, her evil act reached the ears of the gods, and they were not happy with Amaka. In anger and fury, they cursed her. They whispered to the wind, "May the very wealth you seek become the curse which torments you." Not knowing about the curse, Amaka continued to steal from other villagers. She stole not only to eat, but also to sell at the market. But the gods of Nri village had placed a curse on her, and slowly but surely, the curse began to take root. One sunny afternoon, Amaka came to the market to sell some of the crops she had stolen. She carried a basket of fruits to sell, thinking that today would be just like the other days. But when she got there, nobody wanted to come to her stall. They all knew she wasn't someone to be trusted. Suddenly, an old woman with white-gray hair walked up to her. She came from a faraway village, and her clothes were covered in dirt and stones. She carried a huge bag on her back filled with golden fruits and said to Amaka, "Please give me some food. I came from a faraway village and haven't eaten in days." Amaka looked at the old woman. She wasn't thinking about what the old woman had said. Instead, her eyes were focused on the huge bag the old woman carried behind her. Then, as the wind blew, greed crept into her heart, and she told her, "I can give you some of my food, but you have to give me some of the golden fruits you are carrying." The old woman thought for a moment, then agreed. She brought out 2 golden apples from the bag. One was very big and juicy, while the other was small and tiny. Then she spoke, "You must choose one. If you eat the small apple, it will give you the power to turn anything into gold, albeit only for a few weeks, and it would vanish. But if you eat the big apple, you will be able to turn anything you touch into gold, but you won't be able to control it, and it will never leave you." Amaka looked at the 2 apples, her mind filling with greed. She knew she couldn't control the power of the big golden apple, but her greedy nature was pushing her to take it. She steeled her heart and decided to take the bigger apple, not knowing she had made the worst decision of her life. She took the apple and handed the old woman a sack filled with crops. But before the old woman left, she looked at Amaka with pity and sighed, knowing that her greed had already consumed her. Shaking her head, she took the sack of crops and left. Amaka looked at the big golden apple in her hand, thinking she had made the right choice, not knowing that she was soon going to regret her decision. That evening, as the market was closing, Amaka looked at the big golden apple the old woman had given her. She was skeptical at first, but her greed clouded her reasoning. She picked up the apple and started eating it. Just as Amaka finished eating the apple, she felt a strong power rushing through her. She reached for one of the fruits on the table and gently touched it. Suddenly, Amaka saw the fruit changing color, turning into pure solid gold. She looked at her hands in shock, thinking that with this power, she wouldn't have to work hard again in her life. But Amaka didn't know her happiness would only be for a short while. She was about to regret taking the big golden apple instead of the smaller one. When Amaka returned to her small hut, she started turning everything she owned into gold. She turned the chairs, the tables, and even the plates into gold. Soon, her entire hut was filled with items radiating in shimmering gold. When she was done, she was already exhausted, and night had fallen. So she walked into her room and went to sleep. But that night, as Amaka lay in bed, thinking about all the money she would make from selling the golden items in the market, she imagined herself swimming in a pile of gold and wearing the most beautiful clothes in the village. Little did she know the gods of Nri were watching her, and soon she would pay the price of her greed. After selling the gold in the market, Amaka acquired a huge fortune. She bought many houses, lands, and cattle. The villagers were wondering where Amaka got so much gold from but decided not to ask. Amaka moved from the small hut she was staying in to a big house. The house was filled with items Amaka would never have dreamt of, and the walls shimmered with gold. She was staring at her house proudly, not knowing it would all soon leave her, leaving her in a disaster she had entangled herself in. One day, Amaka, in exhaustion, sat at the dining table to eat. She took hold of the food, but to her surprise, the food immediately turned into gold. She tried touching the water, but it also turned into gold. At first, she was confused and didn't understand what was happening. But soon she remembered the power the old woman had given her. It was then that Amaka realized she could no longer eat or drink because of her power. At first, Amaka decided not to bother about it, thinking it would eventually wear off. But as the days passed, the curse only continued to grow stronger. The ground she passed, and even the people she touched, turned into gold. The villagers were whispering, "It's a curse from the gods, we must avoid her." Amaka's heart was filled with pain. She could no longer go anywhere, and the villagers avoided her because of the curse. She couldn't even eat or drink anymore, and because of that, she started to grow thinner and thinner until she looked no more than a skeleton. Every day, her heart ached with pain, and her eyes were filled with sadness. She regretted her greed and wished she hadn't taken the big apple. Some villagers were confused at how Amaka had so much money but still looked so thin. A few of them, in concern, asked Amaka, "What's happening to you?" But Amaka smiled and told them, "I'm okay. I'm just a bit hungry." But Amaka wasn't okay at all. She couldn't eat or drink, and so she grew slimmer and slimmer until she was on the verge of death. Amaka realized her mistake and regretted her decision. "If I had known, I would have taken the small apple instead of the larger one. I was too greedy." Amaka wished she hadn't been too greedy. She wished she had been contented with her little farm. She regretted stealing from other people's farms. Now she had brought upon herself a curse that she didn't know how to solve. Soon, Amaka became desperate. She knew if she couldn't find a way to break the curse, she would end up paying the price. In desperation, Amaka started visiting different people for a solution. She visited many shamans and priests, but they couldn't break the curse. In her desperate attempt for a solution, she decided to visit Ezeaja, the village chief priest. Ezeaja was known as a very powerful priest in Nuri village, known for his ability to break any type of curse. "It is a curse from the gods," the chief priest said, his voice cold but calm. He continued, "You stole all the crops from Ada's farm, and thus the gods have decided to punish you." Amaka bit her lips. Her face was filled with regret. She looked at the chief priest and said, "Please, what can I do to break this curse? If I continue to live this way, I will die of hunger." The chief priest looked at her with pity and sighed. "The gods of Nuri want you to change your evil ways. To lift the curse, you must return what you stole from the villagers and ask for their forgiveness. Then, with a pure heart and a grateful spirit, you must find the old woman who granted you this power and ask her to lift the curse. If your heart is pure, the curse will be lifted. Otherwise, the curse will only grow stronger." Amaka knew what she had to do. With a renewed heart, she walked to the village square in Nri village and confessed, "I was the one who has been stealing the crops. Please forgive me." At first, the villagers were shocked and angry, but when they looked at Amaka, they saw the sincerity in her eyes and decided to forgive her. They said, "Okay, we will forgive you, but you must promise to never steal from us again." With a renewed heart, Amaka nodded. She promised to never steal from any of the villagers again. She even used the remaining gold she had left to pay back all the villagers. Amaka had now learned her lesson. She was no longer the uncontented and greedy person she used to be, but was now kind and helpful to the villagers. However, the curse wasn't gone yet, but Amaka continued to look for the old woman. She knew with a kind heart and a grateful spirit she would eventually find the old woman one day. One sunny day, Amaka left her hut determined to find the old woman to lift the curse. She no longer wanted gold or money, but wanted to live a good life in Nri village. With a strong heart, Amaka was determined to find the old woman, but as she searched from dusk to dawn, she still wasn't able to find her. It was as though she vanished into thin air. Soon the night came, yet Amaka still couldn't find the old woman. She decided to go home, hoping to find the old woman the next day. But as she entered her house, suddenly she found the old woman standing there, in front of her hut, waiting for her, as though she knew she would come back. Amaka walked to the old woman and knelt down. "I have learned my lesson. Please take away the curse from me. I promise to never let greed control me again." The old woman looked at her with a knowing smile and said, "I can break the curse, but you must learn never to let greed enter into your heart again." The old woman also revealed that it was the gods of Nri, who were constantly watching Amaka as she stole from the villagers, that sent her to teach her a lesson. They wanted her to stop her greed and change from her evil ways, so they decided to curse her. Amaka listened to the old woman and nodded. "I have learned my lesson," she said. "I promise to never let the power of greed take over my heart again." The old woman waved her hand, and with a gentle breeze, the power was gone. Amaka thanked the woman and returned to the village, no longer the greedy person she once was. She lived her life with contentment and never looked at what other people had. She was now a changed person, no longer the cunning and greedy person she used to be. She had learned her lesson at a price and promised to never let greed into her heart again. The villagers, in surprise, wondered how she was able to remove the curse, not knowing what she had gone through. And so, Amaka continued to live in Nri village, known and loved by all. Although she wasn't as rich as she used to be, at least now she had a good heart and was no longer the greedy person she once was.